All right, thanks, Jan. Yeah, just to add to what Jan said, I mean, she did cite Percy Bysshe Shelley and recite a poem from him, and I think Shelley's a great example to look at, particularly with the fact that we do need leadership right now out there on the streets. The population is looking for us on the streets. A lot of people don't know why this is happening to them. And I think this will be explained to a great degree with our next speaker, who is the man who, along with the LaRouche youth movement, is making his opponent, the MP for Wills, Kelvin, aka Kill Them Thompson, very, very worried. So we're going to hear now from the leader and the co-founder of the Citizens Electoral Council and our candidate for Wills, Craig Isherwood.
All right. Well, it's good to be back in Queensland with so many faces, so many friends. Oh, g'day, Graham, and from New South Wales as well. From Trudy's come across from Darwin. Morris is here. He drove 1,000 kilometres. Morris is our former national chairman for many, many years, and we're one of the two beginning organisers, people that started the CEC going way back 22 years. And tonight's meeting, it is a bit of a watershed meeting because it was convened around our very special guest, Peter Davis from Malaysia. Peter's down here on holidays. And we've been reviewing his proposal for a deep tropical, which is a concept which is vital for the northern part of our country, the northern Australia. Our vast, empty wilderness up there that is totally and utterly underutilised. This is a subject that I'm very passionate about, and there's good reason for that, and tonight I'm going to give you some insights that you've never seen before from me personally about where I came from, why we started the CEC in the first place. Because when Kelvin or Kill Them talks about population reduction, it makes my blood boil. It's crap. This idea of unsustainability or sustainable population is garbage. And what do you expect coming from a lawyer? He doesn't understand a damn thing about what productivity is, what human creativity is. I do. And I can prove it to you. Not that I want to, for the sake of showing off or anything like that, that's not the issue. The issue is if you really know something, then that means that you have power and power to change. Power to change what you think is unchangeable. And I think over the last 22 years, that's what the CEC has come to represent. And the fact that Jan gave such an inspiring speech is proof of the pudding, proof of principle of what ordinary folk can do if they get their hackles up. And we need a lot more hackles up for what has to happen in this country. And before I go into too much more, I want to set the scene strategically for what is happening in the world today, because otherwise this meeting would not be correct. It wouldn't flow right. Because US statesman and physical economist Lyndon LaRouche has been warning for a long time now, and so have we through our publications, that the dominant monetarist policies of the British Empire, that of globalisation and free trade, have brought the world to the point of a complete implosion of the financial and monetary system. It's happening now. Look what's happening in Europe. The European Bank is looking for 442 billion that was extended to various countries in Europe. They haven't got the money. We have $1.4 quadrillion of debt still floating around in the global economy. Nothing's changed. We've changed Prime Minister, we've changed treasurers, but nothing's changed effectively. So unless we have the correct solutions put in place at an international level, then the entire system will implode and we will go into a dark age. We're in it now. That is why Lyndon LaRouche has called for global Glass-Steagall bankruptcy reform in order to deal with this immediate threat. Now, what is that? That's a political decision, particularly amongst the four major powers of Russia, China, India and the United States, to say there is so much speculative, rotten debt that means nothing that we're going to wipe it off. It means that, from Mr. LaRouche's point of view, he says, we just shut down Wall Street. Get rid of it. We don't need it. Finished. And it means first of all, an agreement amongst sovereign nation states like Russia, China, India and the United States to do that politically. And then internally they do it legally. Right? And after a global Glass-Steagall happens and we get rid of the crap, get rid of those gambling debts and don't have to pay them anymore, then we go through a process of reorganising each individual country's financial and monetary system with fixed exchange rates so we can go back to trade and long-term agreements between countries. And these countries will be perfectly sovereign nation states. And then we'll go back to national credit systems like the Commonwealth Bank used to represent in this country. We've got a long history of credit banking actually in this country. We're one of the two countries in the world that has, Australia and the United States. We're the only two countries that have ever had a national bank, the Commonwealth and the National Bank. That's what we've got to go back to, national banking, where the credit is created for productive purposes first and foremost. It's to sustain the productive economies. Then we have to go with very large-scale infrastructure development. 100 million people to the north of Australia. Massive high-speed rail development in our country. But that would be a characteristic of the development of every country. A characteristic that first and foremost put the physical economic development of the people first. There is no reason why we can't have a universal free hospital system for the 22 million people in our country. 22 million. We're a pittance. No reason. The only reason comes from the British Empire. Don't touch our minerals. Don't nationalise our minerals. Why not? Should have been done back in the 70s. But they sacked Whitlam for that, remember? They being the Queen. So, what's happened with this proposal? I mean, Mr. LaRouche has been talking about this for quite some time, the Glass-Steagall. Well, there's been real progress because, like Mr. LaRouche, once he knows what the necessity is for mankind, he doesn't let go. And so there was a very important diplomatic meeting that took place on April the 29th in Washington, D.C., where you literally had representatives from Russia, China, India at the highest levels, and a representative from the former President of the United States. Now, this meeting was a serious meeting, and it's actually published in this week's edition, the July 2nd edition of the EIR, and it's available on the LaRouche PAC website, and I really do encourage people to read that. It's a wonderful dialogue about specific policies that have to be followed. And the interesting thing is that what that dialogue showed is that our organisation internationally is, and particularly in the United States around Mr. LaRouche, is becoming the alternative government. Mr. LaRouche recently, in the last couple of days, has made it very clear that Obama is nuts. He is now effectively Adolf Hitler in the bunker. Because you might remember back on the 11th of April 2009, LaRouche forecast that Obama was like the emperor, the Roman Emperor Nero, who, when faced with terrible circumstances of his own doing, would deny everything and even kill his closest advisors. Now that is happening to Obama. Look what happened to General Stanley McChrystal. Now, McChrystal's no great shake, but he represented the dynamic of hatred of the troops about this war, this no-win war in Afghanistan where they're getting killed, and he spoke his mind. Off with his head. So McChrystal's head goes rolling out the White House. Yeah. Right? Ordzak. the guy that was instrumental in pushing the healthcare reform, has resigned. Poof! His head's rolling down the hill. So all the rats are leaving the rat-infested Obama ship, and Obama is totally freaked. It's a very dangerous situation. But in the context of that, LaRouche is talking to the in effect as the alternative government in the United States around crucial policy issues to deal with. Everyone knows this happening, that the financial system is rotten, it's dead. It's dying. Gillard and Rudd and Swan know this. Lindsay Tanner knows this. Don't believe all the other crap about the fact that these guys don't know what's going on. They know they're part of the problem. So this dialogue was a very powerful step forward for a global Glass-Steagall. In fact, the German government, on the 30th of June, the coalition government in Germany has drafted a bank restructuring bill premised on the core principle of Franklin Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall law. That government has the responsibility, and then that principle is that the government has the responsibility to salvage necessary commercial banking operations and functions, but does not accept responsibility for bailing out investment banking and speculation. Now, Germany is not part of the four powers, but Germany is a crucial nation for Europe. And look what it's doing. And remember what Merkel did with the speculatives and the derivatives. She cut off the short trades. That's what a president should be doing. That's what a prime minister should be doing. He should be shutting this stuff down. Now, last week also a prominent Russian came out and denounced, and this is a wild, incredibly huge event, and denounced the key leaders of the Soviet Union, such as Gorbachev, as operating in the interests of the British Empire. Now that's what Lyndon LaRouche said in not just last webcast, but the previous webcast. He hammered that issue. And now it's coming out publicly. Now all these issues that I'm talking about now are available to you right now as I speak. And they're available on a website called LaRouchePack.com. And I want to play you just a 4-minute clip or 5-minute clip of the one that happened the other day. So just to recap what I've just told you and give you some more detail. But I also want you to see, if you're interested, please come and see the youth, see me, but find out how to get onto this site. Because every day you can get updated, you can have a strategic briefing in your lounge room or your study or wherever your computer is.
Good evening, this is Michelle with your evening report. On the eve of the 4th of July, an important revelation has come forward that helps us to reflect on who we are and why we fight. As the Declaration of Independence was being composed by the founders of the nation, a conflict came up over Jefferson's use of the word subjects to describe the people living in the 13 colonies. The word subjects was crossed out to the point where no recognition existed any longer of that European term, and in its place was written, the Republican citizens. With the present fall of that British imperial system, it is more important than ever that we look at the founding of this country as we mobilize to bring forth the best aspects of that revolution today. The revolution then goes back to a transatlantic intention of Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa and of a grouping in Germany which included Leibniz, Kessner, and others. They formed the intellectual basis for America to emerge as a nation free from the yoke of empire, with ideas like national banking and sovereign credit generation. The biggest threat to that intention now is Obama. In the perfect image of another British puppet, Adolf Hitler, Barack Obama has now reached a stage of degeneration that can be called nothing other than Hitler in the bunker. He promises, if not removed from office, to continue with insane economic policies of bailout and austerity, at a time when the conditions now exist for the social fabric of the nation to tear apart. Typical of this is the recent tidal wave of layoffs of emergency personnel like firefighters and policemen at the beginning of the summer, when firefighters and policemen are the most necessary. That indicates the beginning stages of a dark age collapse. But when a crisis arises, Obama denies it, and he will continue to do so. Hitler did the same thing. and when his top generals threatened to negotiate the end of the war, he killed them. But while Obama is playing in his bunker, consider the patriotic forces emerging, which are coming to understand the reality of the fight. First, look again at LaRouche's April 29th diplomatic dialogue, featured on this website, and LaRouche's webcast from 1 week ago, which both show the forces emerging from the woodworks around LaRouche and his policies. Then, look at a report we have just received from the head of EIR's Russia desk, Rachel Douglas, on the Russian recognition of the British manipulation of nations. Douglas reported that in a June 27th Izvestia TV interview titled "Who Collapsed the USSR?", Professor Igor Panarin dropped another political bombshell, charging that former Soviet leaders Nikita Khrushchev, in power 1953 to 1964, and Mikhail Gorbachev, in power 1985 to 1991, were steered to power by British intelligence. Panarin has been broadcasting a series of commentaries on the historical and current status of the British Empire as the primary adversary of Russia. In this interview, Panarin said that Gorbachev should be publicly condemned, but it should be done by a public tribunal in order to understand how this person could conduct such an anti-state policy, harming his native country in which he had been born and grew up. In discussion with Associates Today, Lyndon LaRouche said that Panarin's statement could shake the pillars of British control over key aspects of Russian policy today. Douglas's full report will soon be available on this website. But the fight for the survival of the nation against that British Empire is growing as the mass strike develops and as citizens are left with no other option. A LaRouche-packed deployment into the Milwaukee area of Michigan yesterday is typical of that. As soon as organizers set up a literature table, that one, with the giant Impeach Obama sign, a boisterous group of workers emerged from the side door of the plastics factory across the street. They began to applaud and cheer their approval and enthusiastic agreement. The table was swarmed the rest of the day, with nonstop discussion, and one worker confessed they had been told to vote for Obama, and others took their picture beside the banner. This is the environment in the country. 80% of the population wants Obama and the present Congress out. The courage to lead this fight is the same courage that our founding fathers needed when they signed the Declaration of Independence, a signature that could have gotten them killed. Consider that. Then join this fight. That's all for this evening. Stay tuned. We'll have special reports all weekend, and we'll see you Monday morning. I'm Michelle, signing off.
So those reports are available to you guys anytime you want to watch them, and they will bring you up to date with the breaking developments. And I suggest you find out how to do that, because in this period of time things are moving so fast that you need to have access to that. That's why I played you that clip. That's the quality of what you can get access to, free. Now, if we fail in getting a Glass-Steagall reform and a new Bretton Woods, then Lynn, as the world's preeminent economic forecaster with an unmatched record going back to 1959, has made it very clear that we will see the rapid collapse of the world's population from 8.6 billion souls to under the 2 billion that we have today. And that this is a deliberate campaign being led by Prince Philip, the people haters, Prince Philip and the Queen. Now, the physical means for this to happen already exists. We've shut down the ability to actually feed 6.8 billion people. We don't have enough food in the world today. We've shut down access to the medical supplies and the medical facilities, medical technology necessary to deal with things like the swine flu and the avian flu. We got away with it, barely, this last time round without having a total catastrophe. But what's going to happen with the next one? What have we done to change it? Nothing. So, I wanted to say that as we hold this forum, because of the shutdown of the developments of science and technology in the world today, that This is the role that we play as an organisation in bringing new ideas into the Australian population to identify what we can do in order to develop our country further. We have to do this in order to shut down this pro-green fascism that is so rampant in our society today. Look, here in Australia, we know that our productive economy, that part of the economy that's associated with the production of real goods and services to support our own population has been decimated, right? And it's been decimated by a commitment to British policies of free trade. Policies that will kill people. That's what people don't want to hear. This is not exaggeration, it's not hyperbole. The current incessant propagation of propaganda about population control, population reduction, population stabilisation are actually all just euphemisms for mass murder, for killing millions of Australians and other people. Now, gruesome as that might be, that is the intention, and there is no other, of every policy which shapes, intention of every policy that shapes what we do today in our country. If you go back to the 1950s, we had 300,000 family farmers. We have less than 90,000 today. They're a dying species. With that, you have the associated carnage of rural suicides, which are usually hidden because it's not very pleasant. We've shut down the massive food bowl of the Murray-Darling Basin. What? On the pretext of no water. Why? Because we haven't built the infrastructure necessary to supply the water. And we have had drought. But we've had droughts for 100 years, so what's new? What's new is the intention to kill people. The so-called health reforms of centralising the power with the federal government under the idea of efficiency. What, like Obama? Same thing. What's different? Like England? Like the United Kingdom? Same thing. Crap. This is about stealing healthcare from ordinary folk. And as I said before, there's no reason we can't have universal healthcare. What's the intention? The intention is clear. Anyone working within the health profession knows what the intention is. We've seen thousands of our small manufacturing industries literally closed down and shipped to China. I don't have to tell you this stuff because you've been following it. You know, the housing bubble, right, about to pop. And people are saying, oh, the Australian housing bubble will never pop. It will go on forever. Oh yeah? Where's that happened? Never. They always pop. Right? Go back and get yourself a copy of the HBPB DVD and look at it again. And look and say, ask yourself the question, what's changed? Were we right? We're spot on the mark. Again, because it's Lynn's method of looking at the causes. Now, look, the reason that this policy of sustainable population will kill people is quite simple. It's nasty, but it's simple. It's because it equates human beings to animals. And human beings are not animals. Human beings are not subject to this myth of carrying capacity like other animals are. We are endowed with a universal quality of creative reason, which makes us unique. We can make discoveries of physical principles that we can apply through science and technology into the economy to transform a lot of mankind. We are not bounded by limitations like other animals because of this unique quality. And that is proof that you had a massive increase in the growth of the human population when the discovery was made by Nicholas of Cusa. That discovery was made, that human beings are in fact created imago vividae, in the image of God, in the image of the Creator if you don't want to be religious, but it's still a physical principle. The universe is creative, it's evolving, it's not winding down, that's a myth. But we as human beings, as part of the creative universe, have to participate in it, and there's another term for that called Capax Day, which means it's our mission. To transform the universe for the lot of mankind that is created in the image of the Creator. which makes us actually sacred. We're not a cow, we're not a rabbit, we're not a pig, we're human beings. And because we adopted that idea, and because then we had the concept of the idea of the sovereign nation state that was also developed around the 1432 period by Nicholas of Cusa, the nation state, the sovereign nation state, was brought into being for the sake of protecting the general welfare, the commonwealth of the people, to develop the people as the sole reason for the legitimacy of government. And of course that was the principle that the United States was founded upon. So when I'm confronted with him, my blood boils. I'm standing against him. Now, I'm not going to go into a long discussion about Calvin Thompson and so forth, because it's really important that you guys read the background that we have in this paper. If you haven't read it, now a lot of our members get it but they don't read it, which is not a good idea. Read it and you'll get a sense of what in fact we're talking about here. I'm not going to go into a long discussion about Calvin Thompson and now his now Julia Gillard's Fabian Society background, other than to say read that paper. But he made it an issue, because in Sydney a week before last, or a couple of weeks ago, he was confronted by a supporter of ours who accused us of defaming him. Of course, we're not defaming him deliberately, we're defaming him because it's the truth. Talking about the fact that he wants to kill people through genocidalist policies. There's no malice there, it's simply the truth. And read our paper and we lay it out chapter and verse. But when this particular organiser challenged Calvin Thompson, he said, well, what's the Fabian Society got to do with anything? Well, it's got to do with everything. Right? Their policies, the Fabian Society's policies, is to kill people. Right? And they won't let you know it because they operate with this particular idea in mind. The symbol of the Fabian Society of Great Britain is that of a wolf in sheep's clothing in combative posture. That's their symbol. So they actually won't tell you what they're up to, but if you read their history, like we've laid out in the New Citizen to arm people, you'll find out exactly what they're up to. For example, the Fabian Society was founded by these people: H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, Sidney Webb, Beatrice Webb and George Bernard Shaw. Total creeps, all of them. But the most important, this is what H.G. Wells said. He said, speaking as a publicist for the elite running the British Empire, he called for an ethical and intellectual reconstruction of the mental life of the world around the ideas of Parson Thomas Malthus and Charles Darwin. And this is what his so-called mentor said. Just one quote, there's plenty more in the New Citizen. He said, all children who are born beyond what would be required to keep up the population to a desired level must necessarily perish unless room be made for them by the death of grown persons. Therefore we should facilitate, instead of foolishly and vainly endeavouring to impede the operations of nature in producing this mortality. And if we dread the too frequent visitation of the horrid form of famine, we should sedulously encourage the other forms of destruction which we compel nature to use. That's what this guy believes. But Malthus was not the original author of these ideas. There was another guy, a Venetian priest by the name of Gianmaria Ortiz. And Gianmaria Ortiz wrote a whole diatribe against Benjamin Franklin and the rapidly growing American colonies that, of course, that had broken away from Mother England. Ortiz was trained by another Antonio Conti, another Venetian priest, and a guy who conjured up Isaac Newton, who was a great fraudster against Johannes Kepler, the true founder of the universal principle of gravitation. And this is the policy that these guys believed. They believed that, or Ortiz wrote, that the means of subsistence for a population, that is food, rises arithmetically whilst population rises geometrically. And you can see the difference in the curves, the red curve, of course, being population growth. This is the basis for Calvin Thompson saying, overpopulation, that cities are getting full, blah, 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 blah. But this is the justification for all these policies. And it basically comes down to the fact, quite simply, that they treat human beings as animals. The argument for all sorts of ecological sustainability and all this garbage comes down to the fact that they deny human creative ability as a governing universal physical principle within the universe, that we can actually change this idea of having scarce resources because we can make discoveries of physical principles. So, that's what gets my blood boiling with Calvin Thompson's garbage, because that's the principle that's violated here, that human beings are nothing more than animals. And he's the past president of the Fabian Society, and we've got all the detail there to look at what he so-called won't tell you as a wolf in sheep's clothing. So I don't want to have an Australia based upon that Malthusian concept. Australia has a current population of a measly 22 million people and an average population density of 2.89 people per square kilometre. The third lowest in the world behind Mongolia and Namibia in West Africa. By contrast, our iconic suburbs of Manly and Bondi have a population density of 6,900 people per square kilometre. 2,400 times greater than Australia's average population density. Even the electorate that we're in Wills has a population density of 2,800 people per square kilometre. And there's a real irony here, which if you've seen in the press releases, Tasmania, with its vast areas of wilderness, has a population density of 7.4 people per square kilometre, which if emulated on their mainland would mean Australia should have today, right now, 57 million people. But we don't. Now, with the planned development of regional Australia, and this is my proposal, some of you might have seen around the place, if I was President of Australia, we would have this in the year 2025. We'd have a network of high-speed magnetic lever train trade systems. We'd have nests of modular high-temperature, helium-cooled reactors, nuclear reactors. We'd have new agricultural areas, whole new regions opened up, right? And we would have new cities built right around the country as a planned physical economic development project, top down for the country. How do we know we can do this? Well, that's where my past experience in agriculture has come in. Because from 1982 to 1985 and then from 1990 to 1992, I participated in a project that was to take the worst soil in the country and transform it into a food bowl. This is at Tugam in just outside of Harvey Bay. And what you're looking at there is what's called a histosolic soil. It's a soil, basically white sand with 10 to 25% organic matter in it. It's so poor, the only thing that grows on it is banksia, and rabbits can't live there because there's no food for them. That's how bad it is. You have lizards and stuff, but that's because they eat the carrion when the birds drop out of the tree and hit the ground. That's how they live. But it's so poor. Now, we were involved with a soil scientist by the name of Herschel Weichel, who was familiar with these sorts of soils and had a different approach to agriculture. And he said that these soils were gold mines because functionally the 10 to 20% organic matter was basically initially what we call lignocellulose, which is crude cellulose, which nothing can touch, nothing can eat it except microbes. So if you change the soil composition and to make it fertile, the microbes will kick in and they'll transform that lignocellulose into humus and make it incredibly fertile over time. And what you notice actually, once you do this, after 3 months the soil actually changes colour from a brown colour to a deeper black colour as the microbes do its job. So we embarked on a project, and of course the Department of Primary Industries didn't want to know about it. You can't do this. This is not possible. Right? Not possible to do this with this type of soil. So we did. We started. And you can see we cleared the land. A lot of work here because that was virgin scrub initially and clean stick raked it, the whole works. But that's the type of soil it was. White sand with 25%, 10 to 25% organic matter. We had to clear a dam. You'd never be able to do that today under the laws. It's a 25-acre dam. Across the whole dam was about 8 feet, so it was a pretty big dam, and it would catch natural runoff water. But that had to be put in order to supply water. And also to augment that water supply, we had to put in things like flood lifter pumps, which is nothing special, but it was really quite a feat to put that in because I'd never done anything like that before. Fitted that sort of thing up, and it was quite an amazing feat. And that young fella happens to be the fellow who's operating the camera right now. Here. Right, and that pumped 1 million gallons an hour when the streams flooded so that we could pump the dam full, and we did. And we'd run that tractor 24 hours a day, 7, 8, 10 days a week, pumping until we actually pumped the entire dam brimming full because we had a problem. We didn't have water. So we made water. Right? Because we didn't have a huge amount of money, we had to build things that we never had done before. I've got a bit of a background in carpentry in the sense that my father was a builder and cabinet maker, so we needed an air seeder that would seed lettuce seeds. So I built that, which is a real feat because it's got 220 bent aluminium tubes that actually sit on top of a vacuum duct. And the reason I'm showing you this is because Morris knows when you're in the bush, you don't have a choice. You just got to make it. And that's the characteristic of creativity that you find all over our great country, and it's been a characteristic of Australians for 100 years, 200 years. That's creativity. Give people a reason to use it and we'll solve the problems. The more people we have, the more creativity we can foster, the wealthier we become. I had to build a greenhouse too. I'd never built one of these before. But that was you plan it all out, you work it all out. It's all out of bush timber. And that's me, see, back when I was 22, that hairy looking fella. And you can see we're seeding lettuce seeds into celluloform trays with peat moss and vermiculite and so forth. That too, we had to discover the process of how do you make up a mixture that will germinate lettuce. And that was a trial and error process of working out the ratios of dolomite and MAP and stuff like that you put in the peat moss and vermiculite. And then you'd grow them in the greenhouse where you'd raise those seedlings up to be able to put them out into the paddock. Again, having to learn how to do all of this. And then we had to build our equipment. That's the rack that we'd use to plant the lettuces. We were always trying to push the boundaries for the best possible equipment. That's a Fendt tool carrier, specially modified with a bed former in the middle and a lettuce planter at the back. With me on the, I don't think you can see me, but I'm sitting on the back there planting, and did hours upon hours of hand planting lettuces, and we used trickle tube down the centre to preserve the water. So we got results up to a point. There's a lot of errors, a lot of problems trying to sort this out because you're dealing with living processes. It's not a matter of just putting a plant in the ground hoping it grows. When you've got soil, it can't grow anything. So we did have successes. In some parts, the lettuces grew to over 2 pounds each. They were so big that we couldn't put them in boxes. Some places the celery grew 4 foot tall, right? Because we got the balance within the soil right. And there was no one, and we were able to harvest, enough to send it to market. In fact, we were in so much demand for this local produce that we could never supply it all, because what happens is, because you're using the trace minerals, because you're feeding the plants, and you're providing them all the nutrition, the lettuces are so stable they sit on the shelf for a week And you'll never get any sclerotinia rot and that slime that comes with lettuces. You'll never get any breakdown because the things would just sit there on the shelf. And the storekeepers loved it because they were so stable, and because they had the nutrients, they were sweet lettuces. They weren't the bitter, watery things that you get in the shops today. But that's only a small patch of what we were doing. That was a major breakthrough. What you're looking at there is tomato flowers. That's what those silver things are. In Bundaberg, on the best volcanic soils, they get 5,000 cartons to the acre of tomatoes. That crop is 5,000 cartons to the acre. So what we've done is replicated the best volcanic soil in the worst soil that you could possibly imagine by normal standards, by current prevailing thought. That's why I get enraged, because when you look at the north of us and you see all that area up there with all that water and all that potential, all it requires is human activity and human application to make it happen. And that's what I always look at when I start to think about these sorts of things. So we actually harvested tomatoes on soil that couldn't supposedly do anything. We grew cabbages by the cratefuls and sold them in crates to the local wholesaler. They're sugarloaf cabbages, which are very hard to get down south, I can assure you. For labour-intensive reasons, and because I was getting involved in the LaRouche movement internationally, we couldn't plant intensive crops like lettuces during the summer, so I had to go to zucchinis. So this is a very sore point with my wife, because whilst I was off with the LaRouche movement internationally, she was having to be home picking zucchinis and packing zucchinis in order to keep enough money coming in so that we could keep fighting politically. So we used to make our money by growing zucchinis on soil that couldn't do anything. Remember that? That's what they said. But we proved them wrong. We had problems. Massive bushfires used to come through the place and literally burn everything out because it's too hard, because there's so much national wildlife, national park around that couldn't stop it. You can see that young fella, that's Aaron again, he's been the star of the show here. We did have failures. I mean, we got the mixtures wrong, and consequently we lost whole swathes of lettuces. They're very sensitive to trace mineral imbalances, and until you do the tests and you try and figure it out. So it sometimes gets a bit heartbreaking when you do this. But see, when they're putting a man on the moon, the rocket blew up. People got killed. Not quite so dramatic, losing a paddock of lettuce or a few rows of lettuces, but the point is that there's risks associated when you're in an experimental mode. You try and minimise the risk, but that's what creativity is about. You're exploring the way the universe works, trying to find those principles that you don't know exist. Right? That's a classic. I mean, that's copper toxicity with cabbage. That's supposed to be a cabbage, but the guy before us spread a huge amount of copper on the ground, and that's what you see. The cabbages did very well in other parts of the paddock, but that can be fixed, but I won't go into details of how to do that. Because there's a paradox here, and this is what I love about this farming business, there's always paradoxes. This is 280 parts per million of copper in the ground, and you get a toxic result. The Department of Primary Industry says that 1 part per million is sufficient. So you've got 280 times as much, but there's a paradox. The soils in England, and some of the bog soils, have 800 parts per million of copper. So how come this is toxic? They have 800 parts per million in the UK. There's a paradox there, and that would require further investigation to find out why. What is the relationship between the individual elements in the soil, the nature of the humus in the soil, the nature of the microbes? All sorts of things come to mind in order to be able to solve that paradox. But see, that's, again, true science involves looking for paradox. That's what makes us uniquely human. But as I say, that's what I know to be true. So when Kelvin Thompson says we have a population with overcrowding, it's because we haven't developed the capacity within our country to take advantage of what people say you can't do. We've done it. I've done it. So you look at the north. The Northern Australian food bowl, as I call it. the Fitzroy River regional development, all of that is what I'm going to hand over to Peter to talk about in a second. These are the post-war reconstruction projects that were on the cards in the post-war period under Curtin and Chifley. You had number 7, of course, was the Ord River program, but you can see there was dozens of them, and hardly any of them have been built. The Fitzroy River, huge capacity. 3 times the amount of water that goes through Sydney Harbour goes out through the Fitzroy River. Huge amount of water. And to the south of that, there's 500,000 hectares of potential irrigatable land in the Great Sonia Desert. Where, I don't know, because I haven't been up there, but however, I do know that Lance Endersby, whom I trust and whose book's up the back there for those who want to buy it, has made it very clear that that area alone could support 2 million people with massive development, with the water actually harvested instead of just being allowed to run out to sea. What does it mean for the local Aboriginal communities up there? Because people say, oh, they might lock it up with Aboriginal land rights or something. Well, hang on. Aborigines are human beings too. Let's not fall into this trap of treating Aborigines as anything other than human beings. And, you know, what do they think about providing the potential for the future generations of their kids to participate in these great projects for the future? That they be trained into soil science, into great, to actually know how to harvest the land. The Ord River project. Now, the West Australian government, in collaboration with the federal government, has gone to Ord River Stage 2. There's enormous amounts of land up there for irrigation purposes. The water's already there. Lake Argyle is one of the largest lakes, or it is the largest freshwater lake in Australia. Right? So you have that potential in that region. The Daly River, which is just south of Darwin, I think it's about 150, 200 kilometres south of Darwin. There's a whole region there where that could be harvested for the purposes of intensive agriculture again. You look at, come over to Queensland and you've got the Gulf of Carpentaria, there's rivers there too, but you've got the Reed and Bradfield schemes. L.R. Reed did surveys of the Mitchell, Stratton, Gilbert and others, and they form a crucial part of the Bradfield scheme if they ever get built as well. But those rivers are big rivers and they can provide enormous amounts of fresh water. Then of course you have the Bradfield scheme, which is a very important scheme for irrigating the centre of Queensland. And we've covered all these sorts of projects in our New Citizen, which you can go back and reread. I reread it constantly because you're always constantly refreshing yourself on what's the potential. And then this has come off Bob Caddis, the MP's website, and he has a whole section, a tab for the Bradfield scheme, because he's a passionate supporter for the need for the Bradfield scheme to be built. And you can see here, this is the benefits of the revised Bradfield scheme, and you can see, it's a bit faint there, but you can see the various new irrigation areas that will be opened up right in the centre of Queensland there. And the proposals would include, things like new abattoirs, 2 new abattoirs, real infrastructure being developed in order to be able to support the people, because at the time, Queensland was losing population in the bush and still is. So the idea is, how do you keep people coming back to the bush? Well, real industry. This is where thinking was going on about physical, economic productivity. This is Morris's pets. Every time I see Morris, he talks about the gazillion of gigalitres of water that have been flowing out to sea from the Dawson River. This is a shame. This is a crying shame. It's a tragedy. And it's also proof of principle that this idea that we have too many people is complete and utter rubbish. We're just not developing ourselves. So, that's where I'm going to stop, because what you're about to hear from Peter is about this question of deep tropical, what we can do. What are the new technologies that are being worked on right now in order to be able to provide 100 million people for the top end of our country. Thanks very much. It's been fun.